Sarah Groves is a musician and artist based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And she recently had a Kickstarter campaign for a new record of hers called With Me, which I have here. And my wife and I participated in that Kickstarter campaign. And as part of the campaign, we were lucky enough to get to spend a day with Sarah in Minneapolis. And that was in early May, I believe, right?
Yeah, May 5th.
Okay. And I spoke to Sarah about her music a little bit and asked her if she would have a conversation for the website. And she was the first to say, well, my music isn't really weird. And yes, that is relatively true. But the perspective I heard from her as an artist and a musician that day really was eye-opening and a bit mind-blowing at times, and covered some pretty deep topics that I really wanted to have her share with us in this forum. So, Sarah, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate you taking the time for this.
Thank you, my pleasure.
So can you...
Good to see you.
Thank you, you too. Can you give a little bit of background as to who you are?
I've been doing this for about 20 years. So I was a teacher before I did music. I taught high school for a few years and then went into music full time. I've been on the road, a touring musician for 20 years. And I think when you think about that, there's all these sort of, even when I thought about it at the beginning, either you're doing this or you're not doing anything. Well, all in there, there are just a million little places for live music and for people that do music for a living. So it's just been an adventure. I have a very wonderfully committed group of listeners that have followed me. So that makes it really possible for me to still be at it this far in. And so I've made 13 albums in that time. And I do tend to play in the faith community, but my music is really about the whole of life. I am reflecting on, everything, the whole of life, singer-songwriter. I play at the piano, write at the piano. My band consists usually of a three-piece, which is bass, piano, drums, and my bass player also plays pedal steel. So that's a crowd pleaser, and it's just a beautiful thing. So it's pretty stripped down, and the lyric is definitely kind of the point of what kind of what we're doing. But the music is important as well, and so I've been at that for all this time, and just grateful. I still go out. I do about. I was full-time on the road for 17 years, and then about 3-4 years ago, I pulled back and do about 30 to 40 dates a year now. So
that's awesome. And your albums have quite a diverse mix of music. You most recently, this new album, Abide With Me, is very sparse. It's a very simple record, I suppose, because it's mostly voice and piano. Whereas other albums like Add to the Beauty and Tell Me What You Know are much more highly produced, a lot more instrumentation. So can you talk a little about your evolution, the evolution of your music and you as an artist?
I've always been pretty open to and highly influenced by the producer that I'm working with, because I'm not a producer. I've not ventured into that realm. So I've worked with Charlie Peacock. He's Grammy Award winning in every decade that he's been making music, and incredibly creative, one of the most creative people I know. And he worked with me on Other Side of Something, and then wanted to do kind of a singer-songwriter record with Fireflies and Songs. So that was really reflecting when I collaborate with someone, I'm very much open to their vision and the band that I'm playing with. And so I think each of those albums you're hearing a little bit of that. But I think that for when I first came out, the space that I was occupying and the people that were promoting the music, I was in the middle of Christian contemporary music, CCM music. And so that has a whole kind of sound and genre of its own. And I didn't, the first song that I had on radio did really well. And it was a very sort of natural fit. It did well, but I wasn't having to sort of do anything different. it just happened to fit right where they were meeting. But after that conversation became very difficult, and so it was I was having to do some gymnastics to try to meet what I thought they wanted and that kind of thing. And so just the second album in, I I had a record of, really personal, very relationship-oriented songs, and there was sort of a conversation about there's not really anything that we could play here, that would be on a station that where their mission is, safe for the whole family, encouraging, uplifting, and so they asked if I would do, what could you add something? So I added this song to All Right Here, and I always just felt like it was a bummer to me because it felt so different from what I was actually feeling like I was supposed to be doing and sort of the space I was inhabiting at the time. So after that, I just said, look, I'll make a record, and if you find something you like, then great, and if you don't, then I'm okay with that, So I was working with a label that was very generous with me. I was their first artist to sign, and I've been with them for the duration, and they've given me a lot of space to be on my own, and that hasn't always meant like success in the sense of like more listenership, but I feel like the listeners that I have trust me. And I remember at one point, Charlie talking to me about, I was getting, the label is kind of saying around the record, Other Side of Something, like you really have one shot left at kind of getting, doing this, being on this sort of in the Christian music scene. And Charlie came to me and said, you're more of like a mom and pop shop than you are a Walmart. And if you were to do something that's sort of kind of like Walmart-y, then the people that trust you might not trust you anymore, And so stick to what you feel is what you're supposed to be doing, the stuff you're supposed to be putting into the world. And so that was one of the best conversations I ever had. I was able to go to our label president and say, I'm a mom and pop store, not a Walmart. And even on an economic level, on every level, he was able to understand that. And he was like, he said, okay, let's treat it as such then, let's find your people, your ears, and just keep meeting them, there. So that was early, pretty early on. That was like in 2003. And then I really felt free to experiment. The record Tell Me What You Know is huge. I worked with Brown Bannister on Add to the Beauty, and he's produced tons of music, but Add to the Beauty was a real heart album. And then with Tell Me What You Know, I was talking about social justice themes, which at that time in the evangelical church, we weren't addressing as much. And so I wanted to make a really sort of like, kind of like Right Where You Live, full-on pop album, but around themes of social justice. And so songs like, I had a song based on When the Saints Go Marching In, and some others that were like, just a big pop record. But that was kind of, that was kind of on purpose. We were doing something with that, I think the Add to the Beauty, Floodplain, Conversations, those are kind of the quintessential Sara Groves albums. I love Peter Gabriel. I love an epic song, I love something like really vibey that can get a little woolly, I like that. I'm not adverse to that. So I'm not totally just acoustic and stripped down. I wouldn't say that that's me when I'm being myself. There's an emotive, epic feel to what I like, And so that tends to be what I gravitate to. Abide With Me was produced by John Mark Nelson, and he's a young artist, like in his early 20s, and he is very minimalist. So he took that approach to that record. And you've been to the Art House in St. Paul, and my husband and I own a 100-year-old church where we recorded that record. And John Mark said, I want this album to sound like this room feels, or like it looks, to sound like it looks. And it's very warm, lots of warm wood and, resonant. And so that was the goal with that album.
Yes, stripped down is a much better word than simple, but it was not coming to me when I described Abide With Me.
Yeah.
But it's funny, last night, just to prepare for the interview, I listened to Add to the Beauty and Tell Me What You Know. And those albums are very close to me largely because of the Peter Gabriel vibe going on. And even when you sing parts of Come Talk to Me on the reprise at the end. But then on my iTunes, it went through to The Other Side of Something, and I was like, what's this record? It's really aggressive. And like there's totally Fiona Apple elements, there's Beatles elements. It's a very diverse album, as are Add to the Beauty and Tell Me What You Know.
That's Other Side of Something is Charlie Peacock. You hear him in that record, and I love those collaborations and those. I think you definitely hear the Sarah Groves come through. I mean, obviously that's always what it is. But to have then Charlie came back to me. So his daughter was a big fan, and he said, I don't like the word fan, but she's a listener, and so she said, Dad, like. She wanted an album where I was more just like kind of a girl in her piano. And so Charlie came back and said, if I ever got a chance to do another record with you, I would do it differently. Like he felt like he was kind of, it was his playground with Other Side of Something. He was like kind of playing and having fun. But with Fireflies and Songs, he was more, okay, what are you doing when you're sort of at your best, when you're amplified, when you're at your best? And so those two records, I think really show the difference of the approach of that collaboration, because Other Side of Something that was a blank check to Charlie. Songs like The Boxer, he had that, he loves, his whole world is, he comes from a jazz background and very improvisational. And so we had the band improvising for probably an hour, and then they'd play for probably 10-15 minutes, and he'd say, all right, everyone change what you're doing, and then they'd play again for another 15 minutes, and then he'd say, all right, whatever you're doing, don't do that again, and they'd play again, and then he sort of takes all these scenes that they had created, because they get into a whole a whole picture, and he kind of chopped those up and put those back to back. So in that song, in The Boxer, you're moving in and out of these jazz scenes, and so I mean, I love that whole experience. I'm just on the mic in the corner making stuff up, so that was a lot of fun.
You were not kidding, 'cause there's a cut on my eye and it's just round 5. And I used to be quick, I used to see it coming. I used to know how to move my feet. Now I can't duck and I can't land nothing, and I forgot how to bob and weave, bob and weave. When you said this was a fight, you weren't kidding. When you said this was a fight, you weren't kidding, kidding, kidding. 'Cause there's rooms in its bed.
Yeah, very cool stuff. So you mentioned that the element of social justice in your music. Now, that term, social justice, nowadays seems to have or be taking on its own life with social justice warriors. But I know that you are talking about something different than young people fighting their university, the patriarchy, that kind of thing. Can you talk a little about what social justice means in the context that you're using it, and how your music plays into your activism?
Yeah. Well, I'll have to go to a place to talk about it from the vantage point of my faith, because I grew up in church, and in my late 20s I was having a faith crisis, and what I was feeling was that I was going and sort of doing all this work to sort of groom my own personal faith, my own understanding of myself, my own understanding of God, and I was doing all this sort of work and I felt all dressed up with nowhere to go. I felt like, to what end do we gather every week? And I believe in that. I believe in the blessed community. I believe in the flawed, polities that we come together. It's important that we do that. But in attempting to reflect, like, what the Beatitudes are talking about, what Jesus was trying to do and say in the world. If I'm really going to follow that, I felt like what we were doing on a Sunday morning wasn't really reflective wholly of what he was purporting we should be doing. So I started looking around for people that were doing that, and I found International Justice Mission. They're the largest anti-slavery, anti-trafficking organization in the world, and they're truly an international organization. They have offices all over the world and are led by the best and brightest in India and Africa and in the Philippines, all over Southeast Asia. And I started hearing these stories of rescue and of people that were being, they had been enslaved for generations, and now they were being, going through an aftercare program. And there's a story in India of a woman enslaved and then ran for city council. She's now sitting on the city council of her community and ran against the man that is supported by her previous owner. So, there's a survivor-led movement. Like there are more slaves today than there ever have been in the history of the world. And there's a survivor-led movement that's happening that's it's unbelievable. So when I started seeing this sort of, these men and women of faith who, because of their faith, were going into very difficult places, the best and brightest lawyers in India were signing up. And I want to advocate for the poor. I want to be on the side of, I think that's where Jesus said he would be. I'll be here with those that are oppressed, with those that are poor. And so I began hearing these stories, and my first response was, I need to do something different than be a songwriter. I need to be a nurse or an aftercare worker or a lawyer. I need to do something more tangible. And that's when Charlie sat me down and told me about the cellist of Sarajevo and just said, there was a guy during the Bosnian War who played his cello in the middle of recently bombed out areas, and a lot of people say what he did, the attention that he drew, this protest of beauty in the middle of all this chaos, it drew attention to the region and really hastened the end of the war. And basically, art matters and songs matter, and he was encouraging me, write music about what you're seeing. And so I had met a survivor of trafficking. We became good friends, and her life and her resilience and her faith were so compelling to me. So the record, Tell Me What You Know, it all is, every single song in some way reflects her. And I was writing about her. I was writing about the work of International Justice Mission, and now my husband works for them. He's been there 4 years, and it's just been it's kind of an integral part of our life. But to me, it is the expression of faith. My grandfather, he for 40 years he did just went down to the local prison in our town and did, just met with a group of men twice a week. And so I have a history of people engaging just to enter suffering that's not your own. To me, that's what I mean when I say social justice. I just mean justice is what love looks like in public. And I think as Christ followers, I have to think about that.
One of the most compelling things that I realized about you through the St. Paul experience was how much you've given your life through your music and using your music towards this new, after that experience, this activism. A lot of people, if they have money in music, they will just continue investing in that. They'll build a studio, they'll, grow their careers or something like that. You have built a community center. You use this money to change really horrible situations in the world, and your music is developing awareness and a form of activism. So can you share a little bit about the story where your lyrics may have crossed a line for your label?
Yeah. There was actually the song, it was When the Saints, a song based on When the Saints. And I had written the original, I had written a bridge that basically talked about, I think of Harriet Tubman, I think of all these people that have gone before me, and there's a lyric, I see the long, quiet walk along the Underground Railroad. I see the slave awakening to the value of her soul. I see the young missionary and the angry spear. I see his family returning with no trace of fear. I see the long, hard shadows But it builds, and it's talking about, basically then ends with a picture of a girl on the brothel floor. I see a man with a passion coming, kicking down that door. And that was one of the stories I had seen was Svay Pak in the Philippines had been, it was they called it a sex tourism site. It was a place where if you were a pedophile, you could go and you knew you would be unhindered. The brothels were in cahoots with the police, and so there was no protection. These children were being trafficked in the open, basically. And that was one of iJam's first jobs. Was they went there and they just began collecting undercover investigation, materials and documenting all who was there. And the youngest was as young as 5 years old. And they brought all this information to a man in power who wanted to do the right thing. And so they began a work there that led to eventually the Bill Gates Foundation doing a study, an external study of their work in the Philippines. And in Cebu, Philippines, and in other places, they saw as high as an 87% reduction of the trafficking of children in those areas. So their work, it's just amazing, and it works, and it's creating a barrier. It's basically telling these guys that think, I can just do whatever I want. You can't do that with impunity. You will go to jail. And so it creates a buffer, a hedge of protection around these children. And so I wanted to write about that guy. I knew who the head investigator was. I'd seen footage of him kicking down the door of the brothel to get these girls. And so I'd written this whole kind of, it had, talked about the brothel and all that. And so when I went to go record the song, they really liked the song, but felt like maybe there was a different approach to the bridge, just to be more, to fit more with the audience. So I had written this whole other bridge, and it was like more going back to like historically biblical figures and kind of moving then further through history. We had tracked the whole thing. We'd recorded the whole thing. And my husband was out with a friend, and he was talking about how much it bothered him. It kind of lost its original, like the whole point of the song. We wrote it because of this girl we had met and because of these stories we were hearing. And so I was 8 months, maybe 9 months pregnant, and Troy comes home and he's like, we have to recut that bridge. And we call the producer. The record is done. It is, it's finished, and I think even mixed at this point. And it was very last minute, but Brown was producing that record, and he called the studio in Minneapolis, and we got in, and I re-sang the entire bridge. And but the sense was, that talking about brothels in India and brothels in Southeast Asia is not safe for the whole family. And to me, that just felt like, well, that can't be my goal. That can't be what I'm, prioritizing over, just sort of like telling the truth about what I'm seeing. And so we decided to go with the original lyric that I had felt, that I had written. And that made sense. And the song has gone out and had much more, I believe, impact because of that. The song actually was chosen by iTunes to be the discovery download of that for that month. So back then, they don't do the same things exactly now, but back then they used to pick, and you couldn't buy it, like a label couldn't in any way coerce how this was happening, but iTunes would pick, and they would move through the different genres. And so maybe once or twice a year, they would pick a Christian song for it was the discovery download of the week. And so they picked that song to be the discovery download. This is before the album was released. And we had friends who had been working on a project to bring down this certain really insidious brothel, and they had tried several times. I think they were on their 7th try to have the police come and raid this, and every time they went, someone had tipped them off, and so the girls were hidden or gone. And so a friend of mine emailed them and said, Sarah Groves has written you a song, and it was uploaded that night at like midnight, and on iTunes. The album wasn't even available yet, but in where they were gathered in South Asia, they gathered around their little computer, listened to the song, and then went and conducted this raid with the police, and were successful and ended up capturing and freeing all these girls. And I just thought that was such a neat moment for me, that the music, I had written it for them to advocate for them to get their story out, and here they were gathered around a tiny, these tiny speakers. really finding encouragement from the song. And the director of that office wrote me later and said, we rescued that girl. And we all like gathered around the computer and then went out and did it.
That's incredible.
And so for me, that lyric was right and was, telling the truth about what I was, trying to say. And so that was really important. And it might seem like a small thing to push back about, but it was important to me that that's always the balance when you're trying to figure out, market and your music and being true to yourself and all those things.
Well, I think it's just an incredible testimony to so many things, particularly the power of music and music as art, and that art is important. So with that being said, why don't you tell us a little about Art House North, what it is, why you started it, and what you're doing with it?
Yeah, so this, I came over here because my house isn't very quiet this morning, but so my husband and I own a 100-year-old church, and right behind you is actually the album cover of Abide With Me, and that's a picture of 1906. That's a picture of the building being built, and the first congregation, they're having their first service out in the street there in front of the building.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so that's the art house being built. And so we bought it in 2011, and we really modeled it. So Charlie Peacock has just been a mentor and friend for many years, and has just watching he and his wife's life. They were influenced by a lot of different people, but Labrie and that kind of idea of having a place to gather and be able to ask questions. And in Nashville, I found a lot of places where you could get information about how to run your business, but how to a place where you could actually talk about what it means to be a person of faith in the world. What does it look like? What does it look like to kind of tear down the sacred and secular divide and just be yourself, be wholly integrated, and just be doing what you're doing. I used to talk to Charlie about not writing about the filter, but writing about what do you see through the filter. And that's the kind of Christian artist I wanted to be, that I wasn't always writing about the Christianity itself and about and kind of like getting maybe those songs they're valuable. I'm not diminishing that, but for me, I felt really called to the integrated life. If it matters at every level, and it matters everywhere I go, and kind of like in every part of myself. So I wanted the music to reflect that. And so we watched them have this community in Nashville. They started Art House in Nashville, and they bought a 100-year-old church, and they actually lived in their church and had a studio there, and that's where we produced Other Side of Something and Fireflies and Songs. But we would gather there with them, with other people, to hear about. I learned about IJM at Art House, and just talking about what kind of person you want to be in the world and what it looks like to be a person of faith, and to use that wisely. And so Troy and I in 2011 bought this place, and we don't have a good elevator speech because all kinds of things happen here, but the tagline is creative community for the common good. And we have kind of two parts of Art House. We have community partnerships where people have come around us. We have a theater company that the couple that runs it lives a block away from us, and our kids are all in school together. They're just amazing, and they write original plays and do them here, about probably 3 a year. And then we have Troy and I, our Art House programming, and that is all kinds of stuff. We have after school music lessons for kids that are kind of resemble School of Rock. We do a square dance every year. We have all kinds of kind of things around the arts. Our neighbor is a banjo player, and he came to us and said, nothing brings a neighborhood together like a square dance. And so we started that tradition 4 or 5 years ago. And then Troy and I host events where we're talking about different topics, and our format is artists respond. Artists respond to tragedy. Artists respond to creation care. Artists respond to gun violence. Artists respond to whatever the topic is, immigration. So we call up 3 to 5 artists to respond to a topic. And instead of having sort of a panel or talking heads, that kind of thing, we let people just express through their art how they've experienced that topic. And And then the discussion ends up being just a lot richer and a lot more nuanced, which I think we've lost nuance. We've completely lost nuance. It's just almost impossible to actually sort of reason together. And so we found that through the arts you can do that a little bit better. If someone says, I wrote this song because I was compelled, by what I saw, then and also it's often coming from a place of more of lament instead of anger. You tend to find that, I think, when we invite artists, that they're able to sort of share their lament about whatever they see that's incongruent in the world,
Tonight I forgot a line in the play that you and I have been rehearsing since the day we met. It made me put down my script and made me look around a bit. Wonder how we came to play these parts. And I'm here to rewrite this tragedy, one line at a time. Hold on, I'm changing all the scenery. It's okay, we'll be fine, 'cause we know how this ends. Sometimes it's hard to tell what to keep and what to kill. What of this makes us who we are? All that we love the most, all that we cannot let go. How much of change can we survive? And I'm here to rewrite this tragedy, one line at a time. Hold on, I'm
Totally. That reminds me of a video you have on your website. I think it's called Extravagance, where you talk about how an artist could see what he or she does as extravagant or wasteful. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so another person I listen to a lot is Makoto Fujimura. He's a visual artist. Used to be in New York City, was there when 9/11 occurred, and was kind of part of a vital artist movement around 9/11 to sort of bring spaces of healing to New York. And he's written a lot about that. He wrote a book called Refractions, and he's written a book called Culture Care. And he just puts forward that the idea that culture is not a war to be won, but it is a garden to be cultivated. And the difference between sort of a combative stance or a blaming stance, where you stand around I think about that cellist in the middle of that bomb crater in Sarajevo. It's easy to stand around the bomb crater and talk about the bomb crater and how it got there and who's to blame for it and its dimensions and how deep it is and what a loss it is. And it's something different to crawl in there yourself and start creating something beautiful and to have this protest of beauty in the middle of chaos. And both Makoto Fujimura and Charlie Peacock have shown me this, what they call the generative life. And that is the life that crawls into that space and says, what would I build here? What would I put here? Even if it's going to be bombed out again, even if the war doesn't stop, even if the chaos doesn't stop, what generative thing would I put here? And so that was from a blog he had written about, I believe, the war in Iraq. He had written about this little girl that in running back to save a flower, she saw a flower and she'd been struck by a bullet, and everyone said, what a waste. And yet Mako is saying in this gesture, he saw this child identifying with something beautiful in the middle of total chaos, and that actually was a very valiant effort to save and preserve something beautiful, on her part. And so he talks about how the arts we can feel as contemplatives sometimes the time it takes to contemplate, the materials we're using, all those things can feel extravagant and wasteful when we're in these sort of utility and pragmatically driven spaces. And he says, utility and pragmatism have infected every institution we know. And he said maybe primarily the church, where we equate useful with good. And that began a dialogue in my own heart. Oh, wow, what do we do with useless people? How do we think about that? what do we do with the parts of ourselves that feel useless and lacking? And at the time, I had been going through some depression and was having a very hard time being productive. My productivity levels were in the down the drain. So what value was I at that point if I wasn't producing, And so I began thinking differently about my life. I'm having a hard time these days getting out of bed. I'm genuinely moving more slowly. So what is the value I think there's something here for me to learn and to take, to listen to, and my body was telling me something. Everything was trying to get my attention. And so that record, Floodplain, was me really looking at those ideas of extravagance and wasteful. Like, to me, the Mississippi River is the dream of God. And I was looking one day at the city of St. Paul on the bluff, and I thought the city is like the dream of man. It's amazing what we can build, what we can do. It's incredible. You look at a city and it's mind-blowing what we can do, and we work together and we accomplish and we strive and we make these cities. But then there's the river running by the city, and this is an invitation. This is kind of, if you want to know how God is different from us, we could not make the Mississippi River. It is other. It's so other than us. It's other than what we would do. And it's an invitation to this extravagant kind of Huck Finn rest, Come on, get on a raft. Let's go sit a while and kind of ponder. And those things can feel like, oh, what a waste of time. And yet I think the arts are necessary to push back against that pragmatic, useful, constant dream of man that kind of whirs around us. And I think it's important that I actually think once a week we should get away and enter into this space, really intentionally into this dream of God. And obviously, I want to be participating in the dream of God and what I call the kingdom imagination at all times of the week. But that record, Floodplain, ended up being about my journey with depression, but finding value in pushing against that pragmatic space and entering into those extravagant and wasteful. I'm going to do something totally lavish. Yeah.
Sit with me and tell me once again of the story that's been told us, of the power that will hold us, of the beauty, why it matters. Speak to me until I understand why our thinking and creating and our efforts of narrating about the beauty, why it matters. Like a statue in the park of this war-torn town, and its protest of the darkness and this chaos all around, with its beauty, how it matters,
That's amazing. I'd spoken with the artist Steve Vai. He's a guitarist that also thinks at this level, and we were talking about what he calls the movie projector metaphor, where we often think our life is what's happening as the film crosses the movie projector, but we're really the light. And we have the opportunity to choose to be what's on the film or to be the light. And it reminds me a lot of what you're talking about with this filter. You're wearing these glasses and you have this worldview that applies to whatever it is that you're seeing and experiencing.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little more about how you've discovered as an artist what your filters are and how to kind of move beyond that? Because the world wants you to have their filter.
Yeah. That's a good question. I think that Yeah, I love that projector. That's gonna stay with me. It's. I try to be a student of people I admire. So if I find somebody and they're just intriguing to me, we've just lost Eugene Peterson, a pastor of profound gift. I was lucky enough to have met him, and then his books have shaped me for years. I've tried to read Along Obedience in the Same Direction once a year, and but people like Eugene Peterson, Walter Brueggemann, and others, and my dad was very much this way too. He was always encouraging me that kind of what I said, you can get stuck thinking so much about the filter and sort of defining it constantly that you kind of forget to actually do the thing, and so talking about the thing and doing the thing are two very separate things. And I see, for me, the word Christian has come to mean, I think it means a lot of things. It evokes a lot of feelings in people, especially right now. But to me, at the base level, it's being an imitator of Jesus. And to me, Jesus is, so every man says in his heart all throughout history, if I were God, if I were God, if I were God, if I were God. And then the story, as the story goes, this is God himself coming, and he had every right to just roar, to just completely level, to be God. And he is God, and as it says in Philippians, he didn't consider equality with God something to be used to his advantage, but instead thought of others more highly than himself. That was what God did when he came. Now, even if you don't believe that story is real, that's compelling. That's very compelling to me. We're used to power over, always, people, pushing, and it's like, this is the story of the apple. It's, I want that. I'm, forcefully taking and possessing. And so we know what that looks like. We see that play out in history a bazillion times, in seriously every heart. Even my dog has said, if I were God. I mean, every single one of us says it. And here's this story about God himself coming and purporting, I am God, and then doing something so completely different and humble and not power over, but, in service. And so I think that what I want to be doing is sort of integrated. Madeleine L'Engle said, there is no such thing as sacred and secular art. There's only good and bad art. And I love that, because I think, okay, I want to be putting beautiful and good. I think when I do that, I'm participating in the divine nature. And so I want to put those things into the world. And but I always want to be thinking about embodiment, not just sort of what's happening here in a sort of philosophical or theological level, but then, okay, always asking the question, then what does that look like when I'm in a fight with my husband? I wrote a song called Roll to the Middle, and when we literally had the most massive fight, the full-blown, all bets were off, and we were unloading 100%. And he was leaving town he was going overseas for 3 weeks. And I thought, he can't leave like this. And I know what the right thing to do. I don't feel at all even remotely like it reconciling at this point. But he can't leave the country with us in this place. And so I went to the piano just in search of anything to a song of reconciliation. And that song ended up being, beautifully so. I played it for him, after it came out in a matter of 10 minutes, and I call, half an hour later, can I play you something, which is so weird, I know, but played that song, and it's like, no matter how my pride resists, no matter how that wall feels true, no matter how I can't basically make you respond this equally. I can't make you also apologize, but I'm gonna lean into you. I'm going to not let you go like this. And so that song ended up being a part of our reconciliation. So always kind of looking at what does this actually look like in human terms, in what we're actually doing here, and not just having a faith that is for the hereafter, but very much, I think that is what Jesus says more than anything. The kingdom of God is near. It's actually among you.
We just had a World War III here in our kitchen. We both thought the meanest things, and then we both said them. We shot at each other till we lost ammunition. This is how I know our love, and this is when I feel its power. Here in the absence of it, this is my darkest hour, when both of us are hunkered down and waiting for the truth. All the complicated wars, they end pretty simple. Here when the lights go out, we roll to the middle.
I listened to that song last night and was pretty astounded at the honesty and how much I could relate. You know, everybody in a relationship has to go through something like that. And you can choose to let it ruin you, or you can use it as an opportunity to learn about yourself and the relationship you're in. So hearing that in a musical context was very moving and powerful. Again, it's just a testimony to how, when I listen to your music, how much power there is in your art. I don't normally listen to lyrics. I grew up playing guitar, you know, like shredding. So when I listen to music, I'm mostly listening to the music, but you have a way of using the word and the lyric to really get through. It's like the music is a context that you use to allow the word to move forward. So that's another thing I really admire about you and your music.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So can you talk a little bit about patronage? That was a topic that we discussed. You discussed more broadly at the St. Paul experience. You and I spoke a little bit individually about, and it's really impacted your recent career. So talk a little bit about patronage.
Well, I have to thank you, because you encouraged me to take a step, and Troy had been already on board for probably since it started. I mean, he got early wind of what Patreon specifically was doing, but that conversation with you Troy said, of course, one other person says, he's been telling me for so long, and then he's like, one other strange
I'm finally
you.
that person. I'm always in Troy's position, but now I'm on the other side. Cool.
Yeah. So, but I think the coin maybe somehow dropped when we were talking, and I thought, I need to move forward with this. What I say about music, and there's a lot to this, obviously this is a whole big conversation, but the music scene has changed so much, and the way I describe our own lives is that we were working one field for a yield, and then we were working 2 fields for that yield, and then 10 fields, and then it became unsustainable because of streaming. Now, we've lived through many disruptive technologies. We've seen the move from cassettes to, CDs, and then CDs to streaming, and then even downloads than to full on just streaming, just where everything is basically free. I remember a few years ago asking our label, so what happens we were doing all this pre-release stuff, we were like doing all this to try to sell the record early, and we basically are, Dan Michaels had said, you have about a month to sell your record before it comes out, to the people that really want to hear it. And I said, well, what happens now? Because release day used to be such a big deal. It was just like huge day, and then the next month was the big month. So I said, what happens on release day? And he said, oh, that's the day your album is free. And I was, oh my word, I hadn't really fully processed that yet. That's what happens. Like, that's the day your record is available for free. So it's kind of, I think that liminality is good for the arts. I think that kind of, it forces creativity, and we're in a space where we have to think differently. And traditionally, the arts were always supported by patronage. Someone wanted James Joyce to write, and so they supported him, put him up in an apartment and paid for his meals and all that so that he could write. Someone wanted, Vincent van Gogh even was constantly having to write home for more money, but he had patronage from his brother and from different people to do what he was doing, that long defeat that he walked. And so there's a short little window from like the 1940s to our present, till 1995, where we were able to actually like sell a CD and make, kind of have this exchange. But that window has closed, and we've moved into a different time. So I think a lot of artists are looking back to the sort of history of the arts. The arts have always required endowment. So Troy always says, look at your portfolio, you're supporting, you've got these stocks, you've got these things. Are you supporting the arts? Are you supporting, maybe you're supporting like public radio or something. If you're enjoying something, are you supporting it? With Patreon, and you and I had talked about that, but that's basically created a tool for artists to be able to connect with their listeners in a very direct way, and create, hopefully bring value to that relationship, deepen that relationship, and so that you're bringing more sort of exclusive content to the people that really care about that. You can't support every person you listen to with streaming music, but I think you can consider, what 3-5 artists do I listen to a lot? How am I actually engaging in the marketplace with them? So am I buying a t-shirt? Am I going to a show? So to think about that, if I'm really participating and letting someone, and if someone's music really resonating with me and informing the way I think about the world, am I then somehow participating in the making of that music? And I think that Patreon's created an amazing tool to not everyone's going to love my music, but there are people who have been listening for a long time, and you had so, I think, given me permission. I think I felt, if it's kind of hard, it's a hard paradigm shift to go, am I asking for some kind of handout? What is this? Because you're actually, again, having to put value on what you do as a vocational, thing. And I think in the arts that's a struggle anyway. You're always kind of like, is this valuable? So, yeah, thanks for the encouragement.
You're very welcome. And how has the response been?
It's been amazing. We've been up for about 2.5 weeks, and I have 140 supporters at this time, and it's just a game changer. So I had posted for Patreon listeners a little song that Ruby and I wrote. It's a prayer that we kind of sing, not every night, but often, for just all the people that would be displaced on any given night. We know there are millions of people who have been driven from their homes because of violence or whatever. So thinking about the refugee, thinking about those mothers that are on the road, carrying their whole lives on their back. And I just wanted a prayer, something that Ruby and I could sing or say that would just be something we would repeat and would remind us of the refugee at any given time, anyone. So I wrote the song, Jesus, See the Traveler, and I posted that for our Patreon folks. And then I posted just a clip of it to my Instagram, not the full song, but the response was really, really overwhelming. People were asking, where can I get this song? Can I get the whole thing? And so I've already booked a studio and players, and we're going to track that song. Ruby and I are going to track it in the first week of November, and then that will go out into the world, and then I'll be able to tell my Patreon supporters you did this. Literally, that would have just languished in my song notebook because I wouldn't have the resources to put together an album until, basically on an 18-month to 2-year cycle. I kind of gather up, and because I'm paying for those albums. I pay to make them, and it's a huge investment. So that's the difference, is that I'm dreaming every single day. I'm like, oh, I could do that. I could actually record that song. And that's something I used to be able to do, but just in the last, definitely 10 years, how am I going to fund that? How am I going to get that to happen? So it just really is, I cried the first week because I told Troy, I don't think I really appreciated the impact of of not sort of being paid vocationally for a while. And then to have people come and affirm that again and say, yeah, actually, we'd like you to do this for a living, even though I know that that's my role in the world, it was very affirming.
I saw what I saw and I can't forget it. I heard what I heard and I can't go back. I know what I know and I can't deny it. Something on the road cut me to the soul. Your pain has changed me. Your dream inspires. Your face a memory. Your hope a fire. Your courage asks me what I'm afraid of and what I know of love.
It's very difficult to understand that separation of, this is what I'm called to do, and this is how the world makes it happen. And you don't want those, you don't want you don't want your identity to be kind of tainted or poisoned by the way an industry might work. But I'm really glad you did it, and there really are hundreds more people who want to give you money. They're just waiting to give you their money, It's like you just get the word out, and they can, offer even $1 a month, it's something. So it's like buying a CD a year, but it goes directly to the artist. So I think it's a very powerful thing, and I'm really glad that it's working out for you. So congratulations.
Thank you. We kind of tied it in. We're merging what we're doing, what I'm doing. It used to be kind of like, here's Sarah's music or the touring entity, and then here's Art House. But we're really seeing the two working together now, that the Art House is the umbrella, and so it's kind of the Patreon is really also going towards everything we're doing in our lives, sort of in this space creatively, that creative community for the common good. And the music is a big part of that. Obviously, it's coming out of here, and I write here at this piano, and this is where that begins. Yeah.
It's also powerful, at least for me. I only have a handful of patrons. I don't push the Patreon thing very much, but just knowing that there are people who want me to be doing this, and they're sacrificing their own money and their time because they had to earn the money, it encourages me to keep going and to release things and to make it interesting for them. So I don't know if you've experienced that as well, but it sounds like you're starting to. It's great. Yeah,
the idea is just, I had this long I've been ruminating on this idea for a long time, to go back and meet with people that I'd worked with in the past, like Charlie and Don and Lori Chaffer from Waterdeep and these other, bands that I've worked with, and to do sort of a vlog of us writing together, basically where we get together and write a song. And so I've lined up 2 of those already in January. So in January, I'll be going down with a couple friends who do film, and they'll be basically capturing us writing music together. So I'm just excited about the possibilities. And then, like, I have no idea what the song, what will we write, what will we create. But I think just letting people into the process more too has been it's a lot of fun. It used to be kind of like you squirreled away and did your work and then brought it out. And it's a fun idea that I love the author Austin Kleon. He writes. He says he's an artist that writes or a writer that draws. I can't remember, but he does these kind of doodle things, and he curates a newsletter about creative writing once a month, I think, and it's very life-giving to me. I love it. And but Austin he wrote the book Steal Like an Artist, and based on the idea that we're all sort of, we're all just taking all the pieces that inform us and creating something new with that. And so anyway, I've just been so inspired with this. I could actually dream, have ideas and put things into the world now, that where before it was like, well, that's a really cool idea, but it's cost prohibitive, or that just doesn't work. My situation I have worked with this label, but it's always just been a marketing and distribution deal. So Trey and I have funded our own album making from the beginning, and it's like buying a car every year,
Yep, definitely.
So.
Awesome. This has been a great conversation, and I really appreciate you taking the time. So many great insights, and I know that people come to these interviews with artists because they're people like you who live it out, and you are a really gifted artist, and I'm very happy that we could have this conversation. So thank you very much.
Me too. Thank you, Anthony.
How can people learn more about you and start to discover your work and those kinds of things? How do you recommend and best support you as well?
Yeah. Well, Patreon. I have a new Patreon up in, what do you call it? An account, a Patreon
page. I don't know.
page. But if you're not ready for that, I mean, there's music out there. But SarahGroves.com. There's no H on Sarah, and then arthouse.com as well. arthousenorth.com. And those are the spaces that explain what we're doing. And then anywhere you find music, you can find my music. And I recommend Add to the Beauty and Floodplain if you're wanting an introduction.